Hello everyone. I hope you have a great day today. Now, let's check out the latest news. Enjoy until the end. That night, sports fans around the world were left speechless. 11:48 p.m. Los Angeles time. Abruptly and without warning, the words "breaking news" appeared at the bottom of television screens. Blues emergency press conference. A few minutes later, the lights in the darkened conference room slowly came up, and a man appeared on the center stage. That man was none other than Blues manager John Schneider. However, his face lacked his usual confidence and smile. As the camera zoomed in, tear stains were clearly visible around his eyes. The atmosphere in the conference room was heavy, and even the sound of reporters' shutters hesitantly echoed. Today, the team has made an important decision. The words spoken into the microphone were as cold and heavy as ice. Facing the clamoring reporters, the manager took a deep breath and continued in a trembling voice. "We are terminating player X's contract as of today." At that moment, the entire venue erupted in murmur. Termination of contract essentially meant dismissal from the team. But the shock was only just beginning. In the next moment, Schneider lowered his head and covered his eyes with both hands. His sobs shook the microphone. "I'm so sorry." Fans watching in front of the screen held their breath, and social media was flooded with voices of anger and confusion. What happened? Why now? That player? The comments section erupted, with hashtags like #BlueGE #Schneider crying, and #Ohtani involvement theory, dominating the trending topics. But what shook viewers even more were the words he spoke next. Shohei Ohtani is deeply involved in this decision. The press conference room went silent for an instant. No one said anything for a few seconds. The manager's hands trembled slightly in front of the microphone, and the cameramen's lenses all focused on him. Cold sweat ran down Schneider's cheeks as he struggled to hold back tears. "I don't mean to blame him. But the fact is, his comments were what started it all." Shohei Ohtani's comments triggered the firing drama. Fans were confused, reporters were buzzing, and an avalanche of unverified information spread online. Locker room arguments, conflict over strategy, objections to team policy, all sorts of speculation was flying. Meanwhile, those within the team remained silent. It was as if they were hiding something. Someone is lying. The situation was so abnormal that even whispers were heard. It was the next morning that media outlets began to take action. The local newspaper, the LA Sports Times, ran a headline reading, "The team's collapse began from within." Furthermore, shocking details were revealed in the form of anonymous testimony from a team staff member. It's true that Ohtani's words drove the manager into a corner. But it wasn't a betrayal, it was a warning. If this testimony is true, the story changes completely. Was Ohtani really the cause of his dismissal, or was he the one trying to save the team? What truth lies behind the tears? Camera flashes went off again. The reporter stood up and asked a question. "Manager, are you really blaming Shohei Ohtani?" At that moment, Schneider closed his eyes and took a deep breath. Then he quietly muttered, "He was right." Those words were the beginning of it all. The night Toronto saw MLB's rapid rise, trust was dead. Emergency meetings and a flurry of dismissals followed. Manager Schneider's signature tore at the soul of baseball. MLB announced an emergency investigation, sending shockwaves across the nation. Shortly after the post-game chaos began, Rogers Center resembled a battlefield. The crowd had left, and only the lights flickered desperately. In one corner of the stands, staff members were clearing broken plastic bottles, but the atmosphere was searingly tense. Everyone was silent that night, able to simply accept the reality of defeat. Yet in that silence, Bo Bichette sat alone, his hat pulled down low, his footsteps soft. As if unnoticed, in the seat where manager Schneider had sat just a few hours earlier. Unused plastic bottles and disorganized notes were scattered on the table. He stared at them in silence for a while. Then, staring at his own shadow reflected on the black screen, he muttered to himself, addressing no one in particular. "If believing is a sin, then maybe I trusted the wrong person." The voice was so quiet, it seemed to be absorbed into the darkness of the night. However, a Sportsnet staff member who happened to be passing by picked up the moment on his microphone. It was only a 9-second recording, but it would shock the entire nation the next morning. The Sportsnet staff witnessed an unbelievable sight. A team badge on a table in the press room had been torn in half. And a piece of paper had been left next to it. It read, "Never trust anyone again." The memo was never made public. The team completely blocked media coverage and ordered silence from on-field staff. No one spoke out about it. But everyone knew, what happened that night at Rogers Center was more than just a failure. It was the moment the chain of trust was broken, the first night the Blue Jays organization began to unravel. According to team officials, the emergency press conference the next morning was no longer a press conference but more like a battlefield. As soon as the doors opened, the stadium was filled with a thick atmosphere of excitement and tension. Seated in the front row were Bo Bichette, Vladimir Guerrero Jr., and manager John Schneider. Their eyes never met, as if they were living in separate realities. The reporters held their breath, and the red lights on their cameras flashed like countless tiny bombs. The first question came from an American reporter. "Mr. Bichette, are you sure you trusted the wrong person?" Immediately, Bichette slowly picked up the microphone and looked directly into the camera. "That's what I said. I'm telling the truth. If that truth hurts someone, that's the price of the truth." Schneider gripped the microphone tighter and hushed his voice. "Don't talk like that here." But Bichette responded immediately. "Where should I say that? In the manager's office? In a closed room? Are they going to lie again about everything being fine?" At that moment, the air exploded. The surrounding reporters all rose to their feet, shutters clanging like a storm. Guerrero Jr. stepped in and shouted, arms outstretched, "Stop it! Stop it! We lost, but let's at least keep our dignity." But Bichette's words were met with contempt. "Dignity? When have you ever maintained your dignity? Was it that moment in the 9th inning? Or during your silence?" Guerrero's voice trembled slightly, and the tension in the arena reached a fever pitch. Someone at the back of the press box dropped a plastic bottle, making a dry clang. The sound felt like a trigger. The 7th floor office of the team's senior management. A single monitor lit up the silent room. It was playing a repeat of the press conference. The moment Bo Bichette gripped the microphone with anger in his eyes and glared at manager John Schneider, the air in the room became tense and frozen. President Mark Shapiro rested his hands on the back of the sofa, staring silently at the screen. His face was pale, and a mixture of fatigue and despair was evident in his eyes. For several minutes, no one spoke. Shapiro finally let out a low sigh and muttered, as if to himself, "We've let a storm grow inside our own home." His voice was husky, but there was unmistakable anger. General Manager Ross Atkins, sitting at the table, slowly raised his head. His eyes shone like sharp, cold blades. "If we don't end this storm now, this entire organization will burn down." The moment those words pierced the room, rain outside pounded against the glass windows. After a moment of silence, Shapiro picked up a document on his desk and drew a line with a felt-tip pen. It ordered the suspension of all postseason practice and the cancellation of overnight events. The quiet strokes of his pen echoed like the sound of an execution. Atkins continued, his arms crossed and expressionless. "We can't protect anyone. We can't trust anyone. Tonight we're going to cut it off." Shapiro nodded slightly and muttered, as if he was squeezing out the words, "Oh, I can't stop now." An unbelievable silence enveloped the Fox Sports studio. The usually lively atmosphere, filled with laughter, was silent tonight, like a funeral. The announcer didn't say a word, and the words, "Blue Jays collapse," appeared on the screen. Pedro Martinez cut through the silence, slowly approaching the microphone. His eyes were cold, filled not with anger or sadness, but simply with despair. "This is no longer baseball. This is tragedy, the collapse of self-esteem." The studio froze as his deep voice rang out. Stephen A. Smith, sitting next to him, bowed his head quietly, not in his usual fiery tone. He paused for a moment, then spoke in a low, almost prayerful voice, "I've never seen a team so devastated by the truth." None of the fans or staff moved. A video of the Blue Jays players facing each other played on the studio monitor. Beneath it was a comparison chart created by ESPN Jays 2025, Yankees 1978, Red Sox 2011. Just below that was a single caption: only 3 times in history has a team stabbed itself in the heart. When the video ended, social media erupted. The hashtag #NoTrust collapse dominated timelines across the nation. Similar tweets were posted by not only sports figures but also politicians, actors, journalists, and even everyday fans. Trust was shattered. America held its breath that night. This was no longer the Blue Jays' time. It was a night of distrust, a night that tested the nation's pride and moral integrity. According to a source close to the Blue Jays leadership, the day after the incident, manager John Schneider was summoned by team president Mark Shapiro. The meeting took place in a formal conference room on the 7th floor of Rogers Center behind the team's headquarters. Outside, cold rain pounded against the windows, and the Toronto sky was gray. Schneider and Shapiro were the only 2 people in the room. On the table was a single, unsigned piece of paper, a notice. Shapiro sank deep into his chair, slowly closed his eyes, and remained silent for a few seconds. The silence was as sharp as a knife cutting through the air in the room. Then he slowly raised his head and said quietly but firmly, "John, you no longer have the authority to lead this team." The words rang out like thunder. Schneider's brows knitted slightly, his eyes fixed on the paper on the table. His fingers trembled, but he quickly regained his seriousness and answered in a deep, gravel voice. "Trust is something no one can control. Once trust is gone, no one can revive it." Shapiro's eyes trembled slightly. After a moment of silence, he calmly placed his pen on the table. Schneider quietly stood up, took a deep breath, and signed the document. The sound of pen hitting paper echoed like a heartbeat. As he stood in front of the door, he turned around and muttered, "This isn't over. There's no going back." That night, a camera captured his image. Wearing a black coat and without an umbrella, Schneider walked slowly through the rain. The streetlights cast a long shadow over him. The next morning, the photo appeared on the front page of the New York Times. The headline read, "The night the last Samurai coach left, trust died." The moment the photo was released, America held its breath. It didn't mean the departure of one coach. What everyone witnessed was the moment the heart of trust stopped beating. The moment Coach Schneider signed the dismissal letter, the atmosphere in the room changed. Silence spread like an explosion, and the tip of his pen ran across the paper. The sound of the bang rang like an arrow piercing his heart. President Shapiro said nothing. As the manager stood up, a drop of ink left a black stain on his desk. That signaled the end of the team. A few hours later, the news reached the locker room. The players sat in silence, but Vladimir Guerrero Jr. was the first to speak. "It's all over now. The people we trusted are the last to be discarded. What am I supposed to believe in with a team like this?" His voice was low, but it was laced with anger and despair. Bo Bichette leaned against the wall and laughed coldly. "It's over." "No, it's just beginning." Young player Addison Berger timidly asked, "What's going to happen now?" No one answered. Instead, Kevin Gausman quietly stood up and banged on the locker. A metallic clang rang out, and everyone's eyes turned to him. "No one's to blame. No, we're all responsible for this. But no one's apologizing. That's why we'll never win again." That one word split the air in the room. Bichette quickly retorted, "Responsibility. Did you try to push your limits on the mound? Did you protest to the manager? You just shut up and comply, and call it responsibility." Guerrero slammed the table. "Shut up. You're only concerned with your own justice, not the team's." Dust rose and the sound of locker doors opening and closing echoed. Staff members rushed in, but no one listened. The air was thick with blood, and every breath shattered the silence. Then a staff member came in and said in a trembling voice, "The manager has left the stadium." Everyone stopped moving. No one made eye contact. After a moment of silence, Bichette muttered slowly, "He signed, but we can't sign anymore. It wasn't the contract we broke, it was trust." With public pressure reaching its peak, MLB headquarters finally took action. An official statement was released just before dawn in New York. The statement read, "We are launching a formal investigation into the internal disintegration and serious cultural shift of the Toronto Blue Jays." As the statement was read, a hush fell across the nation's media. Reporters clutched their microphones, their faces cast on faces as if they were listening to a historic verdict. Commissioner Rob Manfred stood on stage, removed his glasses, and searched for words for a few seconds. Then, in a low, trembling voice, he said, "This is not just a team issue. It is a betrayal of trust in the very foundation of MLB." At that moment, the studio lights dimmed slightly, and the atmosphere shifted. No one laughed. The only sounds were the announcer's gasps and the cameras clicking. A headline in red read, "MLB criticize." What should have been a sports incident quickly became a social one. The front page of the New York Times read, "In the shadow of victory, trust dies." America held its breath again. Everyone noticed. This wasn't a scandal. In the shadow of glory, a team had quietly imploded. It's the sound of belief in sports being shattered. What did you think of this article? Let's take a look at the reactions of people who saw this news. What happened in Toronto wasn't just a managerial firing, it was the funeral of trust itself. I watched the press conference live, and I swear, when Bichette said, "If believing is a sin," I felt a chill that no highlight reel could ever reproduce. This was no longer about baseball, or wins and losses, this was about human faith collapsing in real time. Schneider's rain-soaked silhouette walking away from Rogers Center is an image that will haunt this sport for years. He looked less like a manager leaving a job, and more like a soldier walking away from a battlefield he once called home. And maybe, deep down, that's exactly what it was, a man who gave everything, but lost the one thing no one can coach: trust. The no-trust collapse will go down in MLB history as one of the darkest nights in modern sports. From a structural standpoint, this was more than internal conflict, it was systemic failure. Rogers Center became the stage where power, ego, and silence finally imploded. When the ESPN comparison chart appeared, BLJ's 2025, Yankees 1978, Red Sox 2011, I realized we were witnessing a historical echo: great teams that destroyed themselves from within. What makes this one different is that it wasn't triggered by scandal or loss, it was triggered by truth. And truth, when spoken in a place built on fragile loyalty, becomes more dangerous than any rival team. I've been inside clubhouses like that where smiles hide fractures and every refine is a lie. When Schneider said, "Trust is something no one can control," it hit me like a punch. Because he's right. Once it breaks, it doesn't matter how talented your roster is, or how perfect your stats are. The heartbeat of the team goes silent. Watching Guerrero Jr. try to stop Bichette, watching Shapiro's hands tremble behind that office desk, you could feel the humanity cracking beneath the uniform. It's not about blame anymore. It's about realizing that in every locker room, the real opponent isn't the other team, it's the moment when teammates stop believing in one another. And Toronto reached that moment. Hard. The tragedy of the Blue Jays is that it mirrors our society. A workplace divided by silence. A leader who falls not because of failure, but because of honesty. Schneider's dismissal wasn't just a personnel decision, it was a message in modern sports: truth is punishable. When Bichette said, "If that truth hurts someone, that's the price of the truth," he wasn't just talking to his teammates, he was talking to all of us. MLB's emergency investigation, the public outrage, the hashtags, they're all symptoms of something deeper. We no longer know how to handle honesty without destroying the person who speaks it. The Blue Jays' collapse isn't about a team losing a season. It's about a generation losing its moral compass. The night it rained in Toronto, baseball stopped being a game. It became a mirror, one that reflected everything fragile about being human. Bichette's whisper, "Maybe I trusted the wrong person," wasn't just a confession, it was a requiem for every team, every friendship. Every broken promise that ever existed in the sport. The torn badge, the note that read, "Never trust anyone again," these weren't props in a story. They were symbols of a dying faith. Schneider signing that document under the storm wasn't resignation. It was an execution, quiet, graceful, and inevitable. The Blue Jays didn't lose a season that night. They lost their soul. And the echo of that loss will linger every time a player says, "We trust each other." The ink drop on Shapiro's desk wasn't just an accident. It was history marking its own final line. Every dynasty ends, but never like this. Not with shouting, but with silence. Not with a lost game, but with a lost soul. From the moment Guerrero said, "What am I supposed to believe in?" baseball stopped being a sport that night. It became a mirror, showing us how fragile human belief really is. The Blue Jays weren't defeated by rivals, they were destroyed by truth. And when Commissioner Manfred said, "This is a betrayal of trust in the very foundation of MLB," it felt like a eulogy not just for Toronto, but for every team that's ever pretended unity could be managed like a batting average. This isn't the end of a season. It's the end of an era, the era where fans could still believe that inside the clubhouse, there was something pure left to protect. I grew up watching Guerrero Jr. and Bichette, believing their smiles, their chemistry, their brotherhood. But reading this, I felt my chest tighten. When Bichette said, "It's over. No, it's just beginning," I realized he wasn't talking about baseball. He was talking about a war between loyal tie and survival. The locker room scene broke me. You can almost hear the metallic clang echoing like a gunshot. Every word felt like a wound opening. How did we get from champagne celebrations to this? From walk-off joy to ink stains and silence? I'm still a Blue Jays fan. But maybe, just maybe, what I'm really mourning now isn't the loss of a manager, it's the death of innocence in the game I loved. I've been in those rooms, the ones where air feels heavy enough to choke you. The description of Gaussman banging on the locker, that sound stays with you. It's not anger, it's grief wearing armor. His words, "We're all responsible, but no one's apologizing," that's the line every organization fears. Because that's when unity turns to rot. I've seen teams fall apart from injuries, bad trades, even scandals. But this is what happens when honesty becomes radioactive. Bichette and Guerrero, two leaders, two truths. One screams for responsibility, the other for justice. And between them, silence. People think championships are built on stats and money. They're not. They're built on something invisible: trust. Once that's gone, you can't rebuild it. You can only bury it. By dawn, this was no longer about baseball. MLB criticized wasn't a headline, it was an obituary for the illusion of control. Commissioner Manfred's trembling voice, the phrase "betrayal of trust." In the very foundation of MLB, this was language reserved for politics, for crises of faith, not for a game. Yet that's the point: baseball has always been America's metaphor. What unfolded in Toronto was a reflection of something deeper: our fear of truth, our worship of image, and our inability to forgive imperfection. The Blue Jays didn't implode because of one bad decision. They imploded because too many people pretended everything was fine. The question now isn't who's to blame. It's when did honesty become a threat? It wasn't the contract we broke, it was trust. That line will echo for generations. When the players sat in silence, when ink dripped on the desk, when the word responsibility was thrown like a dagger, it wasn't about sports anymore. It was about the human condition. Every empire, every team, every family eventually faces that moment when truth becomes unbearable. The Blue Jays' collapse wasn't an ending. It was revelation that belief, once weaponized, turns into its own destruction. In the shadow of victory, trust dies. But perhaps, in that death, something purer can be reborn: not loyalty to a logo, but loyalty to truth itself. Until then, all that remains is the echo of a metallic bang, and a stain of ink that refused to dry. Please let us know your thoughts in the comments. If you liked this video, please click the like button and leave a comment. Subscribe to the channel and give us bell marks to make sure you keep up with the latest videos. See you next time.